When thinking of popular serial killers, 3 names come to mind: Dexter Morgan, the blood spatter analyst who kills by code; Hannibal Lecter, the psychiatrist who eats his victims; and Joe Goldberg, the obsessive romantic. Each kills for a different reason, yet all share one thing in common: they try to use their brains and outsmart everyone around them to survive. So today's question is, if these serial killers were to go against each other in a battle of wits, who would come out on top? But before we start, if you've got any ideas for future videos, drop them in the Discord. That's where I'll be collecting all suggestions. And if you enjoy this kind of content, make sure to sub up. To start off, we can go ahead with the most obvious point: intelligence. To evaluate the overall intelligence of these characters, we should look at 3 different aspects of outsmarting that are important for the battle of wits, that being fluid intelligence, crystallized intelligence, and emotional intelligence. First off, we have fluid intelligence. Now, what is fluid intelligence? Generally, fluid intelligence is defined basically as your mental agility, the ability to think on your feet and solve new problems you haven't encountered before. It's about using logic and reasoning to break down new information and come up with creative solutions. It essentially includes skills like pattern recognition, abstract reasoning, and adaptability. Let's start with Dexter. For this video though, I'll be using season 1 to 4 of Joe and season 1 to 4 of Dexter because that's considered Dexter and Joe's quote-unquote prime. An example of Dexter's fluid intelligence comes from season 1 when he was investigating a case involving women who committed suicide for no apparent reason. This was a new and abstract puzzle as the deaths didn't appear to be murders at first glance. Dexter used his fluid reasoning to analyze a problem. He looked at the files trying to find a lead, and he found one. He recognized a hidden pattern that the other detectives missed. All of the women had the same psychologist. He used abstract logic to deduce the killer's unique and complex method. Dexter deduced that he was making death seem okay to them, which in turn will make the woman feel safe to commit suicide. Dexter, with this, showcased high levels of pattern recognition, being able to find a correlation in seemingly unrelated data, and fluid reasoning by using logic to solve a novel problem and understand a killer's abstract psychological methods. Other showings can come from his framing of dogs. In season 2, during his intense cat and mouse game with Sergeant Dogs, who was already heavily suspecting Dexter, manages to put a tracking device on Dexter's boat. This leads to the ultimate confrontation where Dogs catches Dexter red-handed with a body, holding him at gunpoint. This is an immediate, novel, and high-stakes problem that Dexter had not specifically planned for. But instead of panicking, he calmly agrees to be arrested, a quick tactical decision to lower Dogs' guard. The instant he has an opening, he fights Dogs in the water and successfully overpowers him. Dexter's fluid reasoning doesn't just stop at surviving the encounter. He immediately adapts this bad situation into a good situation, having formulated the plan right away: to permanently frame Dogs. He logically obtains Dogs' fingerprints, plants weapons in the water, and correctly anticipates that because of the traps he's already set, like getting Dogs suspended, no one would believe Dogs' accusations. With this, Dexter showcased a high level of adaptability, being able to solve a life-threatening problem he hadn't encountered before. Joel's fluid intelligence comes from the Eat the Rich Killer arc. After Nadia approaches him at an art ceremony in a skyscraper, he learns a rude waitress had dragged Phoebe away. Joel quickly observes detectives and realizes this is a serious, unknown threat. Faced with a completely novel problem, finding Phoebe in a massive building with no information, Joel has to adapt, which he does so seamlessly. Joel manages to formulate thorough deductions in just 14 seconds. He logically reasons the kidnapper couldn't have left the building due to cameras or gone to the basement from the lack of time, deducing they must be in a specific type of hotel room, one with few adjoining walls and a near fire escape. He visualizes the building's layout and points to the exact room on his first try. But it doesn't end there. When his initial plan to enter as maintenance fails because Phoebe blows his cover, he quickly understands that the kidnapper, Dawn, is delusional and believes she's Phoebe's best friend. Joel plays along with her fantasy, convincing her to open the door, while simultaneously de-escalating the armed hostage taker. But Joel realizes this is the perfect time frame to solve his other major problem of framing the killer. He successfully plants Simon's ear in Dawn's bag, framing her just as the police burst in. With this, Joe showcased high levels of reasoning, deducing the room's location in 14 seconds, swift adaptability, changing his entire behavioral approach when his first plan failed, and novel complex problem solving, juggling the spatial, social, and tactical problems at once to achieve all his goals. However, another instance of Joe's flawed intelligence can be seen in the takedown of Tom Lockwood. Joe enters the hangar with a clear and prepared plan, chloroform Tom and get him over with. But when Tom spots him, he has to adapt in the moment and invents a new story, calmly telling Tom he needs to talk about Reese's DNA, buying himself time and putting Tom off balance. Once he subdues Tom, Joe needs the banking info to frame Tom's bodyguard, another plan he adopted on the spot. So instead of flipping blindly through a book for clues, he uses abstract reasoning, spotting fingerprints to jump right to the relevant page, then solving an unfamiliar code by matching it with Tom's phone. Moving on to Dr. Hannibal Lecter. An example of Hannibal's flawed intelligence comes from the end of Season 2, during the planned confrontation with Jack Crawford, often referred to as the Mizumono Showdown. Hannibal had meticulously cultivated his relationship with Will Graham, orchestrating events with the belief they were moving towards a shared future, potentially involving killing Jack Crawford together and fleeing. He had even kept Abigail Hobbs alive as a potential part of this future with Will. However, as the final confrontation begins, Hannibal detects the scent of Freddie Lowndes on Will Graham, using his extraordinary sense of smell. This immediately reveals that Freddie is alive and that Will has been executing a long deception, betraying Hannibal's trust and intricate plans. This sudden, devastating revelation presents an entirely novel and emotionally charged problem, collapsing Hannibal's planned scenario. Faced with this critical betrayal and the unexpected turn of events, including Jack's arrival, Hannibal adapts instantaneously. He abandoned his plan to leave with Will. He engages Jack Crawford in combat, adjusting his tactics during the fight. He anticipates Alana Bloom's likely arrival and intervention, having preemptively neutralized her firearm by removing the bullets, a subtle contingency. But he then deploys his hidden contingency, using the secretly alive Abigail Hobbs to incapacitate Alana. From there, confronting Will's betrayal directly, Hannibal makes the swift, ruthless decision to stab Will and kill Abigail, thereby destroying the future he had envisioned but ensuring his own escape amidst the chaos. With this sequence, Hannibal showcased high levels of adaptability, discarding complex plans and formulating new ones in real time under extreme duress. He demonstrated rapid problem solving and thinking on his feet, addressing multiple unexpected threats like Jack Crawford, Alana, Will's betrayal, sequentially and decisively. His ability to interrogate the shocking new information and adjust his actions immediately highlights his mental agility and capacity for applying logic and reasoning effectively within a novel, rapidly evolving, and high-stakes situation. Hannibal's full intelligence was also displayed when Abigail Hobbs unexpectedly killed Nicholas Boyle. This presented a novel disruption to Hannibal's likely plan to frame Nicholas differently. Hannibal reacted on the spot. He briefly incapacitated Alana Bloom to prevent her witnessing the immediate aftermath and adapted his strategy on the spot. He quickly manipulated the distraught Abigail into hiding the body, thereby incorporating the unforeseen killing into a new narrative that still protected his interests while binding Abigail closer. There are many more impressive instances of Hannibal's flawed intelligence, but I'll leave it at this for now. So, with these feats side by side, Hannibal Lecter takes the edge. Dexter's logical reasoning and Joe's fast adaptability are strong, but Hannibal consistently solves far more complex and novel problems faster and with greater precision. His ability to read, plan, and improvise in real time shows a higher level of mental agility. Hannibal Lecter takes this with low to a max mid-difficulty. Next, we have crystallized intelligence. Crystallized intelligence refers to the knowledge and skills you accumulate throughout your life. It's like a mental library of all the things you've learned and experienced. Crystallized intelligence is usually measured via knowledge application, as characters rarely go through a step-by-step process of explaining their knowledge in all types of subjects. But it can still be inferred via their feats, as knowledge application is proof of good crystallized intelligence in the area being applied. For Joe, we know he developed extremely vast knowledge of books and literature from his time working for Mooney. He forced him to read every book in the store, with Joe remembering nearly every one of them. Joe himself expanded this knowledge significantly for the sake of his own goals and survival, acquiring a Doctor of Philosophy level of knowledge in English literature by himself, without ever attending college. He also demonstrated deep practical knowledge in specialized fields, such as chemistry, the properties of Accutane and its adrenaline antidote, and the broad electrical, which includes math and science, knowledge, needed to design and build a flawless, high-tech cage by himself in 2 days. In addition, he learned to speak French and successfully became a professor who was regarded as a really good teacher, meaning his crystallized intelligence is clearly on the high end. For Hannibal Lecter, the evidence points to exceptionally high crystallized intelligence, showcased consistently through both his broad erudition and deep applied expertise. Hannibal possesses and utilizes vast general knowledge. He authored a profound psychological text leveraging extensive knowledge and advanced linguistic skill. His personal library contains over 4,000 books spanning medicine, psychiatry, anatomy, literature, and more, indicating a massive base of acquired knowledge. He demonstrates eloquence and breadth of knowledge in conversations, discussing complex topics like Dante's sonnets, history, music, and philosophy with ease, often impressing experts. This points to a huge repository of general knowledge, information, and exceptional verbal ability. Another key area showcasing Hannibal's crystallized intelligence is his application of deep psychological and medical knowledge. Hannibal expertly applies deep learned information from his core fields of medicine, surgery, anatomy, and psychiatry. This is evident in his accurate psychological profiling of killers based on learned principles, his sophisticated psychological manipulation, like gaslighting and psychic driving, which are rooted in psychiatric techniques, and his ability to diagnose rare conditions based on learned associations, like identifying encephalitis by smell or diagnosing Cotard syndrome, and the surgical precision frequently noted in his methods. This demonstrates the effective application of learned facts and procedures. Moving on to Dexter. We know Dexter is well educated and an expert in forensics with a noted specialization in blood spatter analysis. He also possesses deep practical knowledge of human anatomy, police procedures, and pharmacology, such as knowing the precise dosage needed to frame Rita's ex-husband. Dexter consistently applies this library of acquired knowledge. At crime scenes, he can see what type of knife the killer used due to the amount of blood and how the killer slashed to build a profile. He also uses these forensic skills to cover his own murders, such as making Bryan's death look like suicide or setting up the complex framing of Sergeant Dokes. This expertise is the foundation of his persona, allowing him to blend into the Miami Metro Homicide Division, meaning his crystallized intelligence should be towards the high end. However, considering all of this, Hannibal's extensive general and specialized knowledge combined with his exceptional vocabulary and ability to apply learned concepts and procedures accurately makes him comfortably take crystallized intelligence and therefore general intelligence as a whole. And as for Dexter and Joe, it could go either way, but playing it safe, Dexter is second and Joe will be third for general intelligence. Next, we move on to emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is all about understanding and managing emotions, both your own and those of others. It's a set of skills that helps to navigate the complexities of social interactions and relationships. While emotional intelligence has both intrapersonal and interpersonal sides, the focus for measuring it in people usually stems from the interpersonal side, as someone with good emotional intelligence will always be capable in the intrapersonal side no matter what. Hence, interpersonal takes more importance when dictating who has higher emotional intelligence. So, with that in mind, let's compare them in the 4 corners of emotional intelligence. First, emotional perception is the ability to recognize people's emotions through facial expressions, body language, pictures, voices, and so on. This is the baseline ability in emotional intelligence, as is required for any of the other processes in the model. Joe majorly relies on emotional understanding to make predictions and deductions regarding his adversaries. However, there is one instance of this showing. When Beck enters the bookstore, he begins a detailed analysis based purely on observation. He correctly deduces her socio-economic status, her relationship, not dating the rich Dodge, her passion for writing, and her insecurities simply by observing her clothing, her jewelry, or lack thereof, her book choices, and her general body language. For Dexter, an instance of his emotional perception comes from season 1, when the fake ice truck killer, Neil Perry, is caught. When the rest of the department was fooled, Dexter immediately knew he wasn't the killer. He saw right through Neil Perry. This demonstrated a superior ability to perceive the true emotions, or lack thereof, behind the facade, and he has done this a couple times throughout the series. So, Dexter would have more consistent and higher showings of emotional perceptions than Joe. However, we can't forget about Hannibal. Almost immediately upon meeting Will, Hannibal perceives his emotional distress, noting his avoidance of eye contact and troubled state. He accurately deduces Will's high empathy, his method of reconstructing crime scenes, and the terror these associations cause him, leading Will to build fortresses around him. This initial perception is foundationally demonstrated Hannibal's ability to quickly and accurately read complex emotions and psychological states in others from subtle cues, which then informs his long-term strategy. His later perception of Will's betrayal via scent in Mizumono is also incredibly high level, but the initial assessment sets the entire plot in motion based on perceived emotional traits. Another instance is when Hannibal meets Inspector Patsy. He notes that by looking at his face and smelling him, like he does always, he was aware that all the elements of epiphany were present. He perceives that Patsy has had a realization or strong suspicion connecting Hannibal to the El Mostro killing from years ago, likely sensing Patsy's excitement or fear tied to this sudden insight. So, Hannibal would comfortably take emotional perception, then Dexter, and last would be Joe. Second, we have emotional facilitation, also known as emotional engagement, and it's the second activity proposed by the ability model that relates to a person's ability to use emotions, whether it's their own emotions or another person's emotions, in order to achieve a desired outcome. Seeing we'll be focusing on emotional facilitation in others, it's important to simplify this definition, as it doesn't simply refer to any form of emotional manipulation, but also the ability to understand how to deal with emotions in other people, when to engage with said people and when not to achieve the desired outcome. Dexter doesn't really have any good showcasing in this category, but one instance for Dexter is when Rita confirms him about framing her ex-husband, Paul. To manage her suspicion, Dexter plays into the lie that he is a drug user. This action is a deliberate use of half-truths designed to manipulate her emotional state. It works perfectly, as the admission successfully made Rita feel like the one in charge, diffusing her suspicion and placing Dexter in a position of perceived vulnerability. Moving on. For Joe, his single most potent and condensed feat of interpersonal emotional engagement or facilitation is while he's in his Reese personality. Joe said something so affecting to Lady Phoebe that it instantly made her cry, changing her entire life and made her obsessed with him. Phoebe herself later states that no one ever saw her that clear. In one conversation, Joe perceived her deepest emotional needs and vulnerabilities, then utilized his words to completely manage and shift her emotional state. However, like I'll say again, we can't forget Hannibal exists. Hannibal excels in this category, often orchestrating complex scenarios by leveraging the emotional states of multiple individuals. A prime example is the framing of Dr. Chilton in Season 2. This long-term strategy depended on Hannibal facilitating specific emotional responses across several key players. He exploited Chilton's fear and narcissism, leading him to take action, like accusing Hannibal via recordings, attacking Gideon, that ultimately incriminated Chilton himself. He leveraged Gideon's resentment toward Chilton and desperation, ensuring Gideon would misdirect Jack by accusing Chilton, furthering the frame. He played on Jack Crawford's trust, grief, and suspicion, guiding his investigation towards clues Hannibal planted while maintaining an image of innocence or victimhood. He utilized Miriam Lass's programmed trauma, ensuring she would emotionally react to and misidentify Chilton as her captor. He even used Will Graham's desire for revenge, knowing Will would likely involve Chilton and Gideon, drawing them into the setup. Hannibal's method was largely indirect, creating situations like getting attacked, arranging Miriam's discovery, planting Gideon's body, designed to trigger predictable emotional reactions and flawed conclusions. By skillfully managing these varied emotional states, fostering suspicion, trust, fear, he guided the entire FBI investigation towards Chilton, successfully misdirecting them from himself. The scale and coordination of influencing multiple emotional vectors make this a standout feat of emotional facilitation. So yes, as I say again, Hannibal comfortably takes this category, with Joe coming second and Dexter at last. Third off, we have emotional understanding, which is an ability that is built upon an understanding of complexities of emotion. While many people have the ability to recognize basic facial expressions, few of them are able to predictively recognize and understand emotional language and to appreciate the nuances of complex emotional relationships. Again, this category would ultimately go to Hannibal, but let's take a quick look at Dexter and Joe to see how they compare. This might be Dexter's weakest area. He is not able to understand the emotions of normal people like Rita or Debra. Therefore, his only best showcase is his highly specialized ability to understand the minds of other killers. He is able to put himself in the mind of a criminal to perceive their emotions and see if they truly are evil. While he fails at understanding conventional emotions, he demonstrates a unique, albeit narrow, understanding of the complex emotions and compulsions of other murderers. Joel's talent for emotional diagnosis is more broad. After only a brief conversation with Beck's boyfriend, Benji, he identifies that Beck's real problem is her deep-rooted lack of self-worth, a conclusion Beck herself later confirms is absolutely accurate. When dealing with adversaries like the Eat the Rich killer, mind you, he doesn't know that it's himself yet, Joel looks beyond surface aggression to recognize the profound loneliness and emotional motivations at play. He can diagnose complex emotional patterns in friends, strangers, and even dangerous obsessives like Dawn, using that understanding to de-escalate, manipulate, or control the situation as needed. Across the series, Joe's emotional insights are repeatedly validated by those around him, making his skill both consistent and effective in real time. However, Hannibal Lecter demonstrates exceptional emotional understanding, particularly through his profound grasp of Will Graham's psyche. He intuitively understands Will's unique empathy disorder and how it forces him to internalize killer perspectives. He accurately identifies Will's core conflicts, the pull towards darkness versus morality, the pleasure in justified violence, and the struggle to maintain his own identity. Hannibal comprehends the complex origins of Will's feelings, like the paternal bond with Abigail stemming from empathy with Hobbs, and the intense, ambivalent connection, love, hate, understanding, betrayal, Will feels towards Hannibal himself. Hannibal combines clinical knowledge, acute observation, and intuition to grasp the why and how behind Will's emotions, understanding their shifts and contradictions. This deep understanding enables Hannibal to accurately predict Will's reactions, manipulates him effectively, and forge a unique connection where Will feels truly seen. His nuanced comprehension of Will Graham's complex emotional landscape serves as a prime example of his superior emotional understanding, especially someone towards Will Graham. Next, I would have covered emotional management. However, with Hannibal taking 3 out of the 4 corners of emotional intelligence, it's safe to say he takes this category as a whole. And as for the remaining 2, Joe would come second and Dexter at last. Moving on from overall intelligence, we can tackle more tactical aspects in outsmarting and battle of wits. First off, we'll start with manipulation, which is usually an important aspect in outsmarting if utilized correctly in conjecture with good strategy and planning. In Joe's case, this also counts as an extreme form of deception or fabrication. Joe's mind fabricated an entire personality to disguise his own murderous actions from himself, and this happened for the entire Eat the Rich killer arc. The way this works is that Reese, or Joe's killer side, operates with full strategic intent, while Professor Joe, his main personality, is a victim of the manipulation. This is done to disguise his own identity, allowing him to function as a good person while his Reese side handles the murders. The best example that sets up the whole arc is right after Joe as Reese kills Malcolm. Reese then texts Professor Joe on the disappearing message app, saying when he left Malcolm on Joe's table, he thought Joe would go down for his sins. Then he says, "Who are you?" This single act of self-manipulation frames the entire season. It convinces Professor Joe that an external killer exists, creating a perfect disguise. This allows Reese to continue his plans while Professor Joe is busy hunting a killer that is in fact himself. To add to this, Joe's most famous feat for manipulation is arguably his framing of Nadia and Edward at the end of season 4. Joe was able to perfectly anticipate that Nadia and Edward would come to his house to search for evidence against him. So, he manipulated the situation by planting a box of Reese's stuff for Nadia to find. This was done to strategically make Nadia believe she was succeeding and to control her movements. While Nadia was occupied inside finding this bait, Joe used this opportunity to isolate and kill Edward outside near their car. Joe then intercepted Nadia as she exited the house. In her state of shock, he made her pick up the knife he used to kill Edward, directly manipulating her into planting her own fingerprints on the murder weapon. To disguise his involvement and create a perfect case, Joe had the box of evidence, which he led Nadia to, planned in her bedroom to be sent from an anonymous tipster. This would leave the impression on the police that the dead Edward had been the Eat the Rich killer all along. This single tactic allowed Joe to frame Nadia for Edward's murder and simultaneously frame Edward for all the other murders, thereby eliminating both threats and clearing his own name completely. But let me add on some more feats from Joe where he wasn't in this dissociative state. Another example of his manipulation is his framing of Dr. Nikki. After killing Beck, Joe used Beck's own writings to create a false narrative that implicated her therapist. He then planted Beck's body and a box of evidence in Dr. Nikki's backyard. He completed the manipulation by sending Beck's writings to her friend, who he knew would go to the police. This perfectly disguised his involvement and indirectly manipulated the entire police investigation, leading them to arrest and frame the innocent Dr. Nikki. Another showcase is his confrontation with Peach. When Peach cornered with a gun, Joe immediately turned the tables with blackmail, a specific form of manipulation. He revealed he had copies of her private files, including her photos of Beck. He then fabricated a lie that his associate Paco will release his files if anything happened to him. He combined this with direct emotional manipulation, repeatedly taunting Peach that Beck is never going to love you, which made her go crazy and gave Joe the opening to overpower her. Finally, there's a form of mass-scale manipulation, or just wide influence, in which he returned to New York as Joe Goldberg. He leveraged case resources to scramble search results, hacked news archives, and bribed the Madre Linda chief of police. This allowed him to completely fabricate a new public narrative, successfully manipulating the entire world into believing he was a victim who had escaped Love Quinn. But then, how does Hannibal compare? Hannibal employs various manipulative tactics throughout the series, but a prime example, focusing intensely on psychological control, is his systematic gaslighting of Will Graham regarding his encephalitis throughout season 1. Hannibal's intricate methodology centered on undermining Will's perception of reality and exploiting his vulnerability. First, he leveraged his trust. Hannibal operated from the position of Will's trusted psychiatrist. Will, experiencing disturbed symptoms like hallucinations and time loss, confided in Hannibal, seeking professional help. Hannibal deliberately abused this trust from Will. Then, he consistently dismissed Will's accurate suspicion that the cause was neurological. Instead, he actively reframed these severe symptoms of hallucinations, time loss, and spatial neglect as purely psychological manifestations stemming from PTSD, the stress of fieldwork, and Will's empathy disorder. He made Will doubt his own intuition and believe he was losing his mind due to mental illness. From there, Hannibal created proof to support his false narrative. When Will drew a severely distorted clock due to spatial neglect, a neurological symptom, Hannibal observed it but deliberately pretended it was normal, further isolating Will in his distorted perception and eroding his self-trust, which is later used for false proof as well. The manipulation culminated when Hannibal persuaded his neurological colleague, Dr. Sutcliffe, to falsify the results of Will's brain scan. Sutcliffe explicitly told Will there was nothing neurologically wrong, reinforcing Hannibal's gaslighting and confirming Will's greatest fear, that he was indeed mentally unstable. Hannibal orchestrated this ultimate deception, removing any chance for Will to get a proper diagnosis and treatment. This extended campaign wasn't primarily about planting physical evidence or directing actions through external events, like the Chilton framing. It was a direct, insidious attack on Will's internal state and his ability to trust his own perceptions. Hannibal's goal was to manipulate Will into believing he was descending into madness, making him more suggestible, isolated, and easier to eventually frame. The abuse of the therapeutic relationship, the constant dismissal of Will's reality, and the active fabrication of medical proof make this sustained gaslighting a powerful and focused demonstration of Hannibal's manipulative capabilities. I would have now covered Dexter, but Dexter's manipulation just doesn't reach the level shown by Joe or Hannibal. So, in this category, Hannibal stands at the top, Joe follows second, and Dexter falls to third. After that, we have strategy and planning, or what I like to call general tactics. And while some people might bring up deception too, usually and specifically in the case of these characters, their strategies and planning feats will always have some sort of deception in order to throw off their adversaries from catching up to them. So they'll be evaluated with that in mind. Joe's most comprehensive tactical display is arguably his intricate escape from the killing of Love. To give a short description of the situation, Joe learned that Love had killed her first husband, and from the bloody t-shirt, Love deduced that Joe had killed for another woman. This put them in a cold war, with Love planning to kill Joe. Love's plan was to paralyze Joe with Accutane, a poison she had been growing in their garden, and then murder him. As the confrontation began, Joe's long-term planning and foresight were already in motion. He had previously observed Love planting the Accutane, researched its properties, and identified biohacking with adrenaline as an antidote. He had also prepared a syringe himself with just enough dose to kill Love, and utilizing his resourcefulness, already possessed adrenaline pills from Carrie's biohacking stash. During their final dinner, when Love insisted on checking on Henry, Joe anticipated that she was about to execute her plan. He used this brief moment to take an adrenaline pill, his prepared countermeasure. When Love revealed the Accutane, Joe acted fully paralyzed, and he briefly was until the adrenaline kicked in, setting a trap by letting Love believe her plan had succeeded. The moment she came close to slit his throat, he injected her with a lethal dose he had prepared. With Love dead, Joe's strategy shifted to a mass-scale deception. First, he made her murder look like a suicide. He wrote a suicide note in her name, confessing to every crime that happened that season, effectively clearing his own name. To complete his escape, he then faked his own death. To make the death more convincing, he cut off 2 of his own toes. He put one in a pie to be burned in the oven and planted the other with evidence from a previous frame-up. He then messed with their photos to create a false emotional narrative from the police, turned the gas on, and burned the house down. This was all by Joe's design. The police found the charred toe, DNA tested it, and officially declared him dead, while the suicide note framed Love as the sole killer. In one move, Joe simultaneously eliminated his primary threat, cleared his name from all his crimes, and escaped his life to start anew. Next, let's move on to Dexter. Now, because Dexter's more so adapts and uses strategy, we'll look at one of Dexter's most complex tactical displays from the first 4 seasons, the multi-layered and adaptive framing of Sergeant Doakes as the Bay Harbor Butcher. This feat wasn't a single rigid plan, but an evolving strategy that showcased Dexter's ability to set long-term traps while fluidly adapting to immediate, unforeseen threats. The strategy began long before Doakes' capture, as Dexter recognized Doakes was onto Dexter pretty hard. He just couldn't prove it. Dexter's first move was to strategically discredit his pursuer. He confronts Doakes at the station, and after Dexter knows that Doakes isn't recording the conversation, Dexter headbutts Doakes. Dexter successfully anticipated that Doakes would then hit him. This provocation worked perfectly, getting Doakes suspended and painting him as an unhinged in front of the entire department. This was a deliberate, preemptive trap to ensure any future accusations from Doakes would be dismissed. Dexter's strategy was forced to adapt when Doakes put a tracking device on his boat and eventually corners him, holds him at gunpoint, and discovers his kill setup. Caught red-handed in a novel situation, Dexter had to think on his feet. He calmly agrees to get arrested, but then fights Doakes in the water and overpowers him, subduing him and taking him to a cage. From this bad situation, Dexter immediately formulated the plan right away to execute the final frame. He's able to get fingerprints from Doakes and puts weapons in the water for the police to find. This final tactics was built upon the foundation of his earlier trap. Dexter knew that even if Doakes says that Dexter is the true killer, no one will believe him, as Dexter already set a lot of traps for Doakes. This entire operation is an extremely good strategy from Dexter, showcasing his ability to make bad situations into good situations, and his high-level ability to set traps to pretty much frame anybody. And last but not least, we have Hannibal Lecter. One of Hannibal's best showcase of strategy and planning, or general tactics, is the orchestrating plan culminating in the framing of Dr. Chilton as the Chesapeake Ripper, detailed primarily across season 2 but rooted in actions potentially years prior. Now, let me explain to you why Joe and Dexter come nowhere near Hannibal in this category. First, the aim was Hannibal's ultimate long-term security, to create an infallible scapegoat for all his Ripper activities and the copycat murders he committed while framing Will, thus misdirecting the FBI permanently. This goal is far broader than just framing Will or escaping a single trap. First, the process was extraordinarily intricate, involving laying groundwork years in advance, capturing Miriam Lass, establishing Ripper patterns potentially linked to Chilton's FBI involvement, then using the previous framing of Will Graham as a component of the larger plan, simultaneously manipulating multiple individuals including Will, Chilton, Gideon, Jack, Miriam, Alana, then connecting disparate murder cases, Ripper, copycat, into a single false narrative pointing to Chilton. He then employed extreme methods like long-term brainwashing and psychological reprogramming to Miriam Lass, then precisely planting complex, misleading evidence like Gideon's body, the Wounded Man book, Hannibal's own fingerprint designed to look like a frame-up attempt against Hannibal. Second is the coverage and contingency involved in this. The plan involved multiple layers of deception acting as contingencies. If the random killings, layer 1, were connected, the evidence pointed to Will, layer 2. If Will's framing was uncovered, the broader evidence trail connecting Ripper plus copycat cases manipulating Gideon/Miriam was designed to point definitively to Chilton, layer 3. Hannibal even had contingencies within contingencies, like using Gideon's testimony against Chilton and manipulating Miriam's trigger response. Then third is the logical prediction and resource management involved in this. Hannibal accurately predicted the action and reactions of numerous individuals, like Will seeking revenge, Chilton's fear/ambition, Jack's investigative path, and Gideon's hatred for Chilton. He expertly managed resources including people, Will, Gideon, Miriam, information, FBI case files, psychological profiles, and timing. And then the fourth process is the success rate and length. The strategy was ultimately successful. Chilton was framed, Will was exonerated, the Ripper/copycat case were closed, and Hannibal was cleared of suspicion. This strategy spanned years from Miriam's initial capture to Chilton's framing. While other plans like framing Will were complex, the Chilton framing encompassed them, involving more moving parts, relied on manipulating more independent actors, connected a longer history of crimes, and served as Hannibal's ultimate strategic misdirection plan. It best fits the comprehensive criteria for high-level strategy and planning. And with that, it's clear why the Bay Harbor Butcher and the Eat the Rich Killer pale in comparison to the Chesapeake Ripper. Hannibal Lecter outsmarts and controls everyone around him as if it is second nature. Joe comes second, sharp, prepared, and even adaptable, but never close to Hannibal's level. And Dexter, though calculated, simply falls short against minds like theirs. That's why Dexter versus Hannibal versus Joe isn't close at all. The Chesapeake Ripper stands as the true mastermind among them all.